Hey everyone, Chelsea here from A Frugal Homestead. Today we're going to talk about freezing sweet corn. And I'm going to share with you a delicious recipe that we use every year since we discovered it, since our friends gave it to us. It's a great way to freeze your corn, and it's so yummy. So, first off, let me just kind of tell you about my setup. Corn is super sticky, even when it's on the cob. If you've ever eaten corn, you know that. It's sticky, has a lot of natural sugars. So the first thing I actually do is I always buy some disposable tablecloths from like the dollar store or your local supermarket or whatever. And I lay them out on my countertop and cover up my floor just slightly. You can use one or two, you don't need a whole bunch. But that just helps in the cleanup process because as you're cutting the corn, it goes everywhere and then you're getting sugars all over and it can be a real mess. So that's just one of my tips. I also put my corn in a sink full of water. That'll help it keep it fresh longer as you're waiting so that it doesn't start to wrinkle up, right? Because it starts getting old. And then the other thing I do is I just use a 9x13 pan to cut my corn into. There's lots of different things people do, but this is my method. So the first thing you're going to do after you've shucked all your corn, my husband helped me shuck this morning. It's nice and fresh. You really want to have your corn as fresh as possible when you're getting ready to freeze it or can it. The older it is, the gummier it gets, and it loses a lot of the nutrients and the flavors as well. So I just have my ear of corn and a nice sharp knife. You can use a butter knife. I give my kids butter knives when I have them help me. And I'm just literally cutting off the little kernels of corn off the cob right into my pan here. And this process can actually take a while, can be a little bit frustrating, but once you kind of get a rhythm, then you're good to go. And then I just have a bucket here on the floor that I put my used cobs in, and those will go to our chickens. They absolutely love it. It's like the best day ever when we can corn. And you can see just as I'm slicing through some of my corn here that it's like shooting all over the place. Again, that's why I like to put the tablecloth down. If you don't want to have to buy one, if you have a tablecloth or an old sheet that you can put down, that works great. It's kind of up to you as to what you want to use. But for this recipe, we're going to need about 13 cups of corn kernels. So that is roughly 20 or so cobs, maybe 24. And that depends on how big your cobs of corn are and how well they develop. So some of our corn cobs are better developed than others. Like for instance, here's a good example. You can kind of see how the one side just really didn't develop. And then there's others like this one that's just absolutely beautiful. Hey, you can use both those. You don't have to worry about it not having a ton of corn on it. Sometimes your cobs develop. We have earwigs really bad. It's a known corn thing, right? So the earwigs this year have really hindered some of our corn developing properly because they've gotten to some of our corn when it was really young, and that's always frustrating. And then sometimes the corn cob just isn't as strong and just doesn't develop as well, and that's okay. You still get corn off of it, and that's a great way that's great corn to use for freezing, like for this recipe, because nobody is looking at the cob. It's not a beautiful cob, but the corn is still useful. It's still edible, right? All right, I'm going to continue doing this, and we'll come back together here in a little bit, and I'll tell you the next steps. All right, we've got our big bowl of corn now. So we are ready to make a recipe. So we just need a stock pot that we can fit at least 13 cups of corn into. The first ingredient we're going to add is the butter. So we're doing half a cup of butter, and we want it to melt here in our pan. And then we want 2 tablespoons of sugar, that will melt with the butter. And then 2 teaspoons of salt. And I'm just using iodized salt. And then you want some water. Now the corn already has a lot of moisture, but we're going to add a little bit more into it just to ensure that it doesn't burn. So you're going to want to add between a half a cup to a cup of water, and then just let that all melt together. So I'm just going to leave that. My stovetop is on. And next I'm going to measure out my corn. Now you could just eyeball it and say, hey, I think this is 13 cups, but I like to make sure that the corn is nice and sweet, and to make sure that it has that flavor, I don't want too much corn to my sugar and butter mixture here. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that's about 13. So I would say I have enough for about 2 batches here of corn. So here's my 13 cups of corn. I'm just going to let this water and butter and sugar and salt melt together. And then I'm going to add my corn right into this. And I'll, again, bring it up to a boil and let it simmer and cook for, I don't know, about 5 minutes. You could do a little bit less. I wouldn't go more than the 5 minutes, or else you'll start overcooking your corn. And we're kind of blanching it, if you will, in this butter mixture is really what we're doing. But I'll tell you, this is one of the most yummy freezer corns ever. I love it. Okay, so my butter is melted, and I'm going to go ahead and add my 13 cups of corn here. Just add all of them. I'm going to mix it so I'm kind of coating all the corn with that butter and sugar mix that we just melted together. Try and get all of it to have some of it on there. Okay, and now I'm just going to let it cook. And I don't want to leave it. I don't want to just leave it and walk away, because I don't want it to burn, because there's not a lot of moisture. I mean, it has moisture, obviously, but it still can burn. So I'm just going to stir it every couple of minutes, or maybe every 30 seconds or so. And I'll go ahead and set my timer for the 5 minutes so that I cook it all the way. And once it's all cooked, I'll show you what it looks like. All right, once the corn has cooked down, now we're just going to add it to a cookie sheet. And we're going to just let it cool. And you can cool it down faster by putting it in the refrigerator or the freezer. But just kind of spread it out on your cookie sheet, even it out. And then we'll put it somewhere to cool. And once it's cooled, we'll bag it up and freeze it, and I'll show you how I do that. All right, so while we wait for the freezer corn to cool, I like to get my bags ready. And I always buy Ziploc freezer bags, no matter what, if I'm gonna freeze something. If you have a vacuum sealer or whatever, that's a really good choice when it comes to freezing your vegetables and your fruits. But we don't have one as of yet. So I just get Ziploc because they seem to do the best at keeping away the freezer burn. So I spend just a little bit more just to ensure that my crop stays good. But then I just add a tag, sweet freezer corn, the month and the date, or the year, excuse me. And then a lot of times I'll put like directions in case you know, I want to give these away to somebody so they know how to use how to eat the freezer corn. And I use the freezer corn for all sorts of different things. We'll use them for, we just eat them plain as like a side dish. We'll also use them in meals, like I'll unfreeze a portion of it and put it like in a casserole, or like a fun grilled vegetables or something. But so I usually can put, these are quart-sized bags, so I can usually put about 4 cups, not quite, just because when things freeze they expand. So I don't always get a full 4 cups in here, so sometimes 3.5 or so. But I always label everything first, otherwise it's kind of hard to label it later. To freeze our corn, so we're going to get a Ziploc bag, and I like to use a large cup because it just helps to ensure that the corn doesn't get everywhere. So you're just going to open your Ziploc, place it inside your cup, and I like to kind of open it up on the edge. And then I'm going to get my 3 to 4 cups of corn. And like I said earlier in the video, I try and get 4 cups in here. It doesn't always work because sometimes there's just not enough space. And I try not to push it down too much because I don't want to like distort the corn. So there's about 4 cups there. Get my rag here. Okay, then you're going to pull it out of the cup. I'm going to let it settle a little bit. Zip it up most of the way. Push out air. And then I'm going to flatten it out. And I'll freeze it flat like this. A lot of times I'll stack them. And then that way, when they're all frozen, I can put them in a box or a bin or a container just in a row like that. So that is how we do our freezer corn.